So the objective today is that we will be reviewing sections A through F on the interRAI, as shown on this slide. We will be dissecting each section's intent and show you nursing facility level of care as it is applicable. So starting in with Section A. Section A has 12 parts that covers identification information. In Section A1, you will enter the legal name of the individual. This will still need to match the DFR demographic information. A2 is entering the individual's gender. A3 is the birth date, which is by year, month, then the day. A4 is marital status, and the definition will now include common law and same-sex relationships. A5 will capture the Social Security number, Medicare, and Medicaid number. In A6, this will capture your current area agency or independent case management agency number. A7 is the current payment sources for home care that will include Medicaid, Medicare, private pay, and private insurances. A8 is the reason for the assessment. So the language here is a little bit inconsistent with what we already know, but so far as like number 1, the first assessment, that's going to be equivalent to our initial. Number 2 is the routine assessment. That is going to be our annual or quarter review. Number 3, the return assessment will be the reentry. Number 4, the significant change in status. This will be equivalent to our update. And number 5 and 6, they use the language of discharge. This information will be equivalent to our termination DEW statuses. And we're going to be working with interRAI to possibly change that wording to be in line with our current business rule on the terminations. And number 7 is other. So we anticipate this will not be frequently used, but if there is an assessment that is not routine, then this will be recorded here. Then A9 is the date of the assessment, and this establishes a common period of the observation or for each completed assessment date. Okay. A10 is the new data field, and this is to capture the outcomes the individual hopes to achieve. Like, for example, if the individual says, I wish I could attend church more, or I wish I could go to the park. At this point of the assessment, it's very early, so the individual may not be able to identify goals. And if that's the case, then it's really okay. Just stay at the individual's pace during the assessment process. As you will see, we have purple unicorn icons, and these icons are referencing a person-centered way of thinking by offering suggestions on how to discover what is important to the individual. So, for an example above, if the individual says, I want to attend church more, some suggestions to further explore this may include, can you tell me why this is important? Or maybe exploring the barriers to why they aren't able to attend church. And then what about informal supports or maybe even church friends that may be able to assist the individual to achieve this goal? In A11, you're just entering the zip code. A12 is residential living status at time of the assessment. This is the person's living arrangement at the time of the current assessment. Not all of these options listed here may apply with our home and community-based settings. So the settings that are going to be in, that are more significant to the community-based settings are going to be number 1, the private home, apartment, or the rented room. Number 3 is assisted living. And we're also going to include the adult family care option here. And if the assessment is occurring in an institution, then you would select number 9, long-term care facility, possibly number 10, a rehab hospital, number 11, a hospice facility, number 12, acute care hospital may all apply. The other settings that were not mentioned are specialized institutional settings. A13 is living arrangement. This is one of the first steps in discovering the individual's informal support network by uncovering who are they residing with. A13A will record who the individual is currently living with, such as is the individual living alone, with a spouse or a partner, with their children, or maybe even with their siblings. A13B is recording any changes in living situation within the last 90 days. A13C is identifying when an individual or relative feels that the individual needs to move from their current residence. So somewhere there's some kind of a conflict with their current residence. And A14 is just capturing the time of last hospital stay. There are four parts to Section B relating to intake and initial history. The information in this section should only be recorded during the initial assessment. It seems this information may not change during the course of the active assessment process. So in B1, it's capturing the date the case opened. This is going to be the date the individual initially is referred to or contacted the Area Agency on Aging. B2 is capturing the ethnicity or race of the individual. B3 is the primary language for the individual. B4 is residential history over the last 5 years. This section appears to be more institutional focus. With the current CMS final rule on home and community-based settings, we, the Division of Aging, we need to evaluate this section and we'll provide more direction in the future. Section C is on cognition, and it has 5 assessment segments. Currently, there is usually a brief statement in the narrative that's capturing the individual's orientation. The narrative structure usually contains something like alert and oriented times 1, 2, or 3 with a reference to confusion and or short-term or long-term memory. So a lot of you already are capturing this information. But in the 5 segments to this cognition section, it will promote more exploration into the individual's actual performance in remembering, making decisions, and organizing daily self-care activities. In C1, you will be recording the individual's actual performance in making everyday decisions about the task or activities of daily living. Person-centered thinking applies here by focusing on the individual and their autonomy in making decisions about how to manage their daily living task. As you know, some family members usually have a differing opinion about the individual's decision-making performance. It is important for you as the case manager to engage the individual regardless of the family opinion to ensure the individual's performance is evaluated. If the person is not engaged or participating due to their level of capability or maybe choice in not participating, then this should just be accurately recorded in this section. C2A is memory and recallability, and this begins to explore the individual's ability to remember recent and past events and to perform sequential activities. C2B is procedural memory. This is exploring the individual's ability to perform all or almost all steps in a multitask sequence without cues. This is focused on cognition and not to be confused with physical limitations. For example, if a person is dealing with quadriplegia, they may not be able to complete the steps with dressing, but may have the ability to direct someone through the sequential steps, sorry about that, and respecting the individual's preferences and how they would like the steps to be completed. On C2C, the situational memory, this is to measure the individual's orientation status. So based on the individual's ability to recognize both people and places, they should be able to recognize recognize purposes of particular rooms in their home, find the way to their room, or just some examples of how to measure that. It's not necessarily that they have to remember the street number of the house or apartment that they're living in. Section C3 is exploring the periodic disordered thinking or awareness of an individual. This may indicate presence of delirium. Some characteristics of delirium may be demonstrated by disordered thinking and exhibited through rambling, irrelevancy, or incoherent speech. C4 is going to focus on the acute change in mental status from person's usual functioning. This is any sudden or recent change in the person's usual level of functioning, such as changes may include restlessness, lethargy, being difficult to arouse, or altered environmental perceptions. An example that came to mind is an individual who may be experiencing a UTI, or urinary tract infection. And as most of us are aware, this usually is presented by an altered mental status change. And this might be the beginning of how to gather that baseline of an individual that might be experiencing some kind of disordered thinking or altered status, such as like someone experiencing a UTI. On C5, this is the change in decision-making as compared to 90 days ago. This will give the case manager a snapshot, if you will, of a quick comparison in a 90-day period of any progress or decline. Communication and vision makes up Section D and has 4 assessment parts. D1 is making self-understood. You may be exploring the individual's ability to express or communicate requests, needs, opinions, and urgent problems, and to engage in social conversation. From a person-centered way of thought, think about an individual who experienced a stroke. In interacting with the individual, you may witness through your interactions and interviewing that their delayed response time to gather their thoughts or searching for words is really delayed. So this individual may exhibit levels of frustration, but they are able to express themselves. In D2, this is the ability to understand. You will be exploring the person's ability to comprehend verbal information. This item measures the person's ability to process and understand language. So, for example, we just talked about an individual that might have experienced a stroke, and they're able to express themselves, but it's really on a delayed response time for them trying to gather their thoughts, search for their words, but they're able to express themselves. This might be where you're more engaged, you're interviewing, and you're finding that there's a lot of repetition going on in the conversation or in the interview, and you're finding that the individual might be missing part of the conversation intent, or they're missing the whole intent of what you're trying to relate to them, and that's kind of what's being captured here and being evaluated. In D3, hearing is evaluating the individual's ability to hear with any assisted device that they normally use, or maybe they don't use a device. D4 is capturing vision. It's evaluating the individual's ability to see objects with or without assisted devices, like using glasses, large print books, maybe magnifying glasses. So here we've hit our first crosswalk from our current e-screen into the interRAI. So to ensure quality and accurate clinical assessment, for an individual in this situation needing 24/7 supervision, which is currently our Section 2A5 e-screen indicator, this will now crosswalk into 3 sections. Section C1, which was the cognitive skills for daily decision making, with a score of 3 or 4, and Section D1, ability to make self-understood, with a score of a 3 or 4, and Section D2 will apply, which is the ability to understand others, with a score of 3 or 4. Section E is on mood and behavior. Mood disorders, for example, of depression, sadness, and anxiety are common for adults in the home and community-based settings. Mood disorders can be a result from, but not limited to, social isolation, cognitive impairments, physical pain, and or adjusting to a new residence. The risk of leaving mood disorders untreated or ignoring increases the risk of further functional decline and suffering. There are 3 parts in assessing an individual's mood and behavior: through verbal expressions and or nonverbal gestures. In E1, this is capturing the presence of mood and behavioral symptoms. Types of verbal expressions that may be recorded here is when the individual may state, well, what's the use? Just let me die already. Or possible nonverbal cues exhibited are agitation, being irritable, or even a sad affect. E2 is self-reported mood. This is capturing the individual's response to how often they experience enjoyment, restless or uneasy feelings, and feelings of hopelessness. If the individual is unable or refuses to respond, then capture this in the reporting and just move on. E3 is behavior symptoms that occurs. I apologize for that. E3, let me start over. E3 is behavior symptoms that are occurring, can be disruptive to the individual and others engaged with the individual. The types of some examples of behavioral symptoms can be a person wandering, being verbally abusive, being physically abusive, and or inappropriately, being socially inappropriate. Section F is psychosocial well-being, and this has 5 assessment parts to evaluate the individual's social environment. F1 is discovering the individual's patterns for participating in social activities, their interest in social activities, relationships with family members, and or other social acquaintances. F2 is discovering the individual's loneliness. This may be from the individual stating directly or feeling lonely, or the case manager is noticing incongruent messages of how the loneliness is being presented. For example, the individual may be stating in a bold manner, "Being alone doesn't bother me. I am a loner," and yet they are tearful. Some ways to start discovering this during the assessment process are displayed with the unicorn icons. So, for example, exploring more into, tell me more about why you're feeling lonely. Exploring into who tends to come to visit the individual and when was the last time anyone came to visit, or just some examples. F3 is recording the change in social activities in the last 90 days. The case manager will be able to further evaluate and compare every 90 days the individual's level of social activity participation. F4 is the length of time alone during the day, that is during the morning and afternoon. The case manager will be discovering the actual time during a day the individual is left alone. And this isn't usually due because of like a cognitive impairment. It's just the length of time that they're alone regardless of any kind of impairment. F5 is identifying any life events that an individual considers to have had a major impact on their life in the last 90 days. Stressors are experiences that are disruptive to an individual's daily routine. For example, the individual was hospitalized for a health flare-up like COPD, pneumonia, or they experienced a stroke, UTI, and so on. This also can include the death of a loved one, a death of a friend, a death of their pet, or maybe they were a victim of a crime or an assault. But basically, a stressor can be almost anything that can impact the individual's quality of life and goals of care.